Hello, welcome to Signal and Noise Podcast. We are brought to you by ROI Rocket. We're our market once company. And man, we have a great podcast today. I'll do a little quick introductions, but I'm going to let you guys introduce yourselves. First of all, I'm Brian Lamar. I'm the Senior Director of Panel Quality here at ROI. Andrew, hello, sir. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Brian. I'm excited for our first five-way episode here. That's with beans and onions for the Cincinnati crew.
That's right. That's right. Are you doing No Shave November? That's my first tough question of the day.
So this is actually a Movember, hence
That's right.
brilliant mustache. But yes, if you see me and I look more like a cowboy and less like a researcher, that is because raising awareness for men's mental health issues. No Shave November is male specific cancers. So that's when you kind of, look like a mountain man. I'm kind of like the groomed cowboy for, men's mental health issues. So thanks for calling out the elephant in the room, because
You never know these days when we work remote if somebody's just being lazy or for his cause. I'm happy that it's for a cause.
Yes. Yes.
Joining us today, the first timer from Market Once is Erinn Taylor. He's in charge of product platforms and go-to-market. How you doing, Erinn?
Doing pretty good. I appreciate you guys having me. I've been here for about 6 or 8 months working with ROI and Market Once. I'm really working with the product piece of that. And but I bring a lot of history related to market research, right? So I've been in the industry for probably 25 years. Probably a lot of companies you guys know, Dynata, DeCilles, Kantar, et cetera. So it's good to be here.
The small, low awareness companies you've worked for.
Well, they start off very small. When I first started Cypher, there's 5 of us. So now they're
all tiny seedlings. You just took them to the moon.
It's what 6.75 billion now with Qualtrics. So it took a step by step, and they're there.
Yeah, awesome. And then really the reason we're all here today is the guys from Verisoul are here, and I'll let you introduce yourselves. But we have Joey Maddox and Henry LeGard. Henry, Joey, introduce yourselves.
Well, it's super great to be here. Before we even jump in, I do want to call out Joey's beard. It's more unkempt in person, so you're probably not getting that fidelity here, but that is a No Shave November for sure.
I was going to say, you were saying, is it intentional or lazy? Unfortunately, more lazy, because this is how it's been all year. But I did recently invest in a trimmer, so I actually have a trimmer now. But anyway.
And Joey has, despite the unkempt face, he's got a nice collared shirt on for you guys today.
Yeah, exactly.
It looks very good.
So you're getting our best. These are basically suits for the very
right.
And this is a reason number one to watch us on YouTube. This looks good on YouTube.
Yeah, precisely.
If you're having the disappointing experience of only listening to us right now, follow the links on YouTube.
Well, it's super great to be here. So I'm Henry. I'm the CEO and one of the co-founders of Verisoul. Our whole team comes from the banking space, primarily solving problems with fraud, fake accounts, sophisticated kind of nation state actor level fraud and attacks. Our whole company's been defending it in a bunch of different verticals around the world, like AI companies. We work with some of the leading AI companies in the US, the frontier models that are trying to prevent Chinese hackers from scraping their models. We work with fintech companies, payments companies to prevent fraudulent actors from, stealing money from citizens and from companies. And then we also work with folks in the market research space and are here to talk about a lot of what we're seeing in that space, but I'll let Joey intro himself as well.
Yeah, and I'm Joey. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer. My background is actually more in the market research space historically. So Henry and I used to work at Bain & Company together, launched a number of surveys, actually used Dynata, Qualtrics, and ROI Rocket. So a lot of the names already mentioned, and a few others, of course. I then went into private equity and did software investing, ran a number of customer calls there, customer surveys, market surveys, kind of continued doing more market research. One of the investments that I made personally was in Verisoul. And so I invested when they first started as an angel, and then joined the team full-time as the first employee.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks for coming on. And, I'm not sure you've been in the industry long enough to realize data quality is such a hot topic. And so welcome to the battle. And we're glad to have you. We need all the little soldiers that we have. And so you started the company with banking. Did you have marketing and research? Was that on your radar when you thought of this?
Honestly, when we started the company, definitely not. Although Joey and I have faced this problem firsthand before. So as Joey mentioned, we worked at Bain. Joey's team actually had to throw out an entire research project?
Entire survey. Yeah, that's right. So it's for a 3-week diligence for a PE case where they're looking at buying a company. I was working on the market model team. A big part of that is just the survey and understanding all the different inputs to the model. And unfortunately, about a week before the end of the case, we had to throw out the survey. We couldn't use any of that data. Didn't go over super well. We want to make sure that we had high quality data for our client, right? We don't want to show them data we don't believe. And there were just a number of inconsistencies and nuances that I was actually looking at the data and called out, and we ended up throwing out the whole survey.
Yeah, so we've kind of faced that firsthand, but when we started the company, we were definitely not focused primarily on research, and still to this day, it's an important, vertical for us, yet not our whole business. Super interesting and worth noting is that at the beginning of this year, 2025, we had 0 customers in market research. We had none. We just knew that it had a lot of opportunity. We had early inklings from some conversations. And so we decided to focus on it, and now are protecting nearly 1 billion clicks a year. Customers have switched, some of the largest customers in market research have switched or are in the process of switching to Verisoul, and we're winning customers at a 97% rate against competitors. So I think that just can show you what kind of an outside perspective with, deeply rooted in banking grade fraud prevention brings to the industry is something that just works a bit better and is helping customers across the industry. So
Right. And one thing I would add too, across the industry, the thing you said at the end is critical here. We work with panels, we work with the people aggregating sample, we work with the people actually conducting market research, launching the surveys. So really all different types of customers within market research.
Can you just kind of describe Verisoul, what it does, how it helps prevent, maybe kind of at a high level, how does it work?
yeah, for sure. So we help companies do 3 super simple things. We tell them whether the users are real humans rather than bots, AI. We tell them whether that's a unique user or unique account or unique transaction versus a duplicate or a cluster or a group. And then we also detect whether it's fraudulent, meaning is it in the right location using a real device on a real network connection? And the way we do that is completely invisible. So, the way we work with market research companies is very symbiotic in that we're not research experts, we're fraud experts. We know user behavior and real-time signals. There's no interaction with the user at all. We're completely invisible, but we're monitoring things, like sophisticated mouse movements, key presses, phone accelerometer data. We're looking at device characteristics to identify if it's unique. We're running active kind of network packet inspection to figure out if there's proxy servers in between the device and your company's, network. So a lot of it is, all happening in real time instantly on the front end before users ever get to the survey. And so our idea is, hey, let's just prevent the bad actors from ever getting in. And that way the real users get in and can capitalize on the economics there.
Yeah, and within market research, there's kind of 3 different ways that people prevent fraud. We call it the ABCs of fraud prevention. You have actor, you have behavior, and you have content. Content's the most obvious one. That's the one that when we were at Bain, we could easily look at the responses to the survey, see if they were relevant, see if it was consistent across different questions. We had, different flags or different, you throw in fake brands or have a couple gotcha questions, and we would use the content to screen out bad actors. Verisoul is much more on the actor / the survey respondent and the behavior side of the situation, doing everything in real time. The second someone shows up to a survey, as they're taking the survey, we're tracking all of these things invisibly.
Yeah.
I had a question too. So I've been paying attention to and done some testing with the platform and whatnot. I do see a lot of identification of like a proxy or some of VPN work with proxies, also kind of like location spoofing, etc. And I see something also called impossible travel that you have as well. So I'm kind of interested to hear a little bit more about the impossible travel. And then I want to identify a lot of times where they're real or versus fake. When they're fake, it has a lot to do with like the proxy score or the VPN or the location spoofing. But is there other things that you really have seen a lot of that outside of those that is kind of setting you guys apart?
So one of the things that we found in the market research space specifically is that almost all of the fraud is coming from cross-continental fraud farms. So a lot of this fraud is actually originating from professional organizations in countries like Nigeria, Bangladesh, Pakistan, China, Venezuela, Syria. And one of the way they actually, commit this fraud is they actually have a bunch of real unique devices in some sort of human click farm, and maybe they're leveraging AI or maybe they're leveraging bots, but it's all coming from abroad, and they're leveraging mobile IPs. So like they're connecting through real AT&T or real T-Mobile or Verizon IPs in the US, or Orange IPs in Europe, or Bell Canada in Canada. And these appear like real users, and they're real devices. And for unsophisticated products that are just kind of looking at lists of IPs, these users are getting through very easily. And so one of the ways we differentiate, I kind of mentioned this, is the network traffic inspection. So we can actually detect never before seen proxies and VPNs coming from completely different countries. And then Erinn, you brought up a great point, which is this idea of location spoofing. So every other product in market, or just generally, thinks about it as proxies and VPNs. But what's actually risky is not using a VPN, it's changing your location, right? Using a VPN between Austin and Dallas, it's really not a problem at all. You're in the same market, you're in the same state, not really a problem, and probably shouldn't be blocked. That would be a false positive. What's super high risk is going from Nigeria to Dallas, right? And that's where we actually completely separate from any of the other products in market, where we can figure out, hey, even if it's a VPN, are they changing their location actively and spoofing that original location or not? And so that's one of the things we do that completely sets us apart.
What's also unique there too is even if they connect to the exact same IP, we can differentiate and say, hey, this person's not spoofing your location and this other person is.
That's a great point. I was trying to identify that because, for example, I use a VPN, especially when I'm traveling around, and my VPN will show me off in New York, right? Even though I might be in Denver, I might be in California. So I really want to understand when we're trying to identify, fraud that's coming through the platform. Obviously, we want to get the ones that are spoofing the location, but when it gets into the VPN, I mean, more and more, we're going to want to be running through some sort of VPNs that's protecting our network or the computer system.
Totally. And I'm sure you all are aware of the recent legislation passed in the UK that, actually kind of allows the government and networks to kind of monitor your traffic. And so users are much more likely to be leveraging VPNs, just, normal everyday consumers, to actually protect and stay private from the government or onlookers. And so actual kind of consumer real world usage of VPNs is on the rise. And so if your fraud protection product is just blocking VPNs outright, you're going to have a ton of false positives. Not to mention a lot of the very high value businesses, hospitals, education users are going to be coming from private networks or VPNs. And so if you're blocking VPN usage, that creates a very high false positive rate on high value traffic. And so that's why this kind of location spoofing is super, super important to distinguish bad from good.
Yeah, you're absolutely right that is a major area where we see false positives, and even more correct to point out that behaviorally, the people who are using those are our most expensive costs per recruit, highest
Right.
panelist acquisition. From someone like us in the panel perspective, they're very expensive for us to have joined the panel. From the researcher side, they're very difficult to achieve those end sizes. So Brian and I are on a crusade against the false positives as well.
Literally the same words, that's the exact same word I use. I literally was talking to our engineering team, crusade. I literally was talking to our engineering, like, we are on a crusade against false positives because they're so harmful for businesses. And the way most other companies detect more fraud is just by catching more users, right? And that means they're blocking a bunch of real traffic. And so a lot of times, like when customers try Verisoul, they're actually reducing the number of blocks. They might literally be blocking fewer users, but it's now just the correct ones to block rather than the fraud getting through and the good users getting blocked. So it's like you don't have to block more traffic to block more fraud is the non-trade-off.
Yeah, I think one thing that's interesting too. So false positives are obviously very harmful for any business. I think inside of market research, they're especially harmful to the overall industry, right? You have people who are showing up to try to take surveys. They're getting kicked out of one survey, saying they can't take another one. They're going through the exchange. They're popping on a survey. They fill out the screener. They should have qualified, but for some reason they got flagged for using a VPN. and keep getting blocked over and over and over again. They don't want to take surveys. And so you lose real people that are the ones that are supplying the information to the industry. And so it's even more harmful than like a gaming customer or other customers.
Yeah, Brian, I think they listened to our episode that we released this morning before recording this one, didn't they?
It's
Yeah.
we had a great episode rant, and you make me want to cry because I am super passionate about this. It is so harmful for us as a private company. It's harmful for those respondents. It's harmful for the industry. And so I'm really appreciate y'all taking time to do that. And Andrew, I'm sure you had a follow up, but yeah, I just wanted to
I-
mention that my tears are falling right now because I'm so happy.
Cry before, or just Joey and me? That's good chemistry, but maybe we're taking that.
No,
Yeah,
it's just it's such a problem. And now, I studied panels for so long, over a decade, and we were a consultant, and so I didn't have access to first party data. And so I could study them from primarily a behavioral, attitudinal standpoint and a kind of an overall data quality standpoint. But now we have access to, I keep saying a number, I'm not even going to say a number anymore. We have over a dozen different panels, and I know they're real people. I talk to them. I have 3 studies today that were blocked by various digital fingerprinting platforms, and I know they're real people, and I have their LinkedIn profile, I have their work email address, I have them listed on websites. I've talked to some of them. And so the fact that y'all are helping improve the industry and best practices and passion about it is really, welcome to the crusade. So
Sorry, I did have a quite change in the subject I wanted to ask about a little bit because of compliance. I kind of wanted to have a little bit of questions about how are you doing in terms of volume in the US versus Europe versus other regions? How about in terms of that compliance associated with like GDPR or EU framework, privacy framework, et cetera? And just to talk a little bit more about that to understand, is this just a US thing? Is this a global thing? And, if you talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, we have been global by default, kind of day one. We actually have customers, actual business customers on all 6 continents, and then traffic on all 7. So we actually do every so often see some little, heat map in Antarctica for traffic. But yeah, we serve traffic. We inspect and analyze users globally. We work with customers around the globe. Obviously, privacy is, first and foremost on our mind. And, we've been in the kind of identity and fraud space far before starting Verisoul. And that's always a focus, is how do you do all of this while ensuring that users can remain private and then the companies can remain compliant. And I think one thing we just hit on, but I'll just reiterate, is this idea that, consumers want to be able to leverage private networking through VPNs. And if companies are just, willy-nilly blocking those without any kind of understanding of user behavior and recourse, that actually makes it harder for users to stay private. So that's actually a big issue against user privacy that, we're focused on as well. But then, yeah, I mean, the other thing that's challenging about this space is privacy, right? So you have browsers and networking providers trying to continually improve the privacy for users, which is great. The challenge is it makes it harder and harder to therefore do fraud prevention. And so it's, how do you actually strike that balance of making sure that users are legitimate humans and real and unique without necessarily exposing their true identity and everything they do online?
So I think you kind of looped back to something really important that I want to dive into. When you're talking about, again, those VPNs and how usage of a VPN is a very typical, even if it's not an automatic disqualification for a platform in our space, it's definitely pretty universal mark against a respondent when you're going through a traditional fraud platform in our space. So
legacy fraud platform, I like to call them.
a legacy fraud platform. So when you all were talking about your ability to kind of track the origin location, whether or not that origin location was being spoofed, is that something that other platforms cannot do? Is that something that makes you really unique? If you could speak to those of us who are less technical, right? What really sets you apart, and is that it? Because intuitively, that makes sense to me. That would be a key ingredient to the sauce here.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's definitely one of the main ingredients, but I think, we at Verisoul think about all of the real-time intelligence in their own kind of unique modules, and we have many different modules. So one of them is networking, kind of networking in location, where I can tell you a couple interesting things we do there. So we actually run our own networking servers around the world. So there's no other provider that does this. They're they're going to be relying on some other kind of CDN or some other provider to do their networking for them. We write our own networking servers so that we're at the lowest possible level interacting with the user networking traffic. Now, what this allows us to do is when we're actually seeing a user, we're actually sending a few tiny little packets of data to their device. And we can, through those packets, figure out a bunch of information. So number one that would make sense to you guys is like VPNs are encrypting packets, right? So they're taking data packets that you're sending on the internet, they're encrypting them so that no one can inspect them, right? So that's kind of how VPN works, is basically you add like this layer of encryption to the data such that no one can like peer into it and see the data itself. Now, that adds some size to the networking packet, right? Let's say 100 kilobytes or 10%, right? We can actually take advantage of that and send packets of data at different sizes to try to figure out if there's a VPN adding encryption. Another one that's very interesting is each operating system, like your iPhone or an Android device, they like to interact with the networking device in a totally different way. And so you can actually initiate different kind of handshakes with a device, and it'll tell you how it likes to network. And that allows you to figure out what's the true device type. And then if you see, oh, that, the iPhone is actually transacting network packets like a Windows machine, there's some sort of proxy or an emulator running. So it's kind of some cool stuff there. Another one that's super interesting is your device right now has two different methods for talking to the internet. One is kind of the main internet protocol, and then the other is a separate protocol, which is actually made for like video sharing. So if Joey were on video here, his device and mine would be operating on a totally different networking path that doesn't send network data to the internet. It just sends it directly between devices. But what that means is you can actually figure out the true IP of that device through that separate networking path and often expose the user's true location. So a lot of these fraudsters will basically not cover that up, and we can actually pierce their proxy and kind of go around it and figure out where they actually are or their true IP, even if they're trying to hide it. So those are some of the many ways we
want to chat about the latency checks as well, in terms of location spoofing and how that can be different from, if someone's on a proxy or VPN.
Yeah. So another one that's cool is we actually rely on like physics and the speed of light to help identify location spoofing, which is very hard. Yeah, it's very hard to spoof. It's very physics, as it turns out. But simply put, like, if you're pretending to be in Los Angeles, but your device is in Nigeria, your device is very far away. And data to get to your device can only move at the speed of light. And that is because your device is so far away, we can actually measure, like, based on the speed of light versus how long it takes for data to transact to your device, we can figure out, hey, is the person actually where they claim to be, or are they spoofing their location? So if we can look at a networking packet and understand if the user's actually where they say they are, even if you're using a proxy, VPN, whatever you want to do to hide it. We can pierce through that and figure out if you're obfuscating your location.
To kind of summarize, I think the biggest difference of Verisoul versus competitors is we're running active checks and we're trying to find immutable signals, so that even if someone is trying to spoof their location, or they're trying to hide the fact that they're on a different device type, we're still able to detect that. And so that is, like, you just went into detail on like 4 different aspects.
Right.
They all have the same theme of active checks on immutable signals, so a fraudster cannot get around it. It's not a game of whack-a-mole when it comes to the speed of light.
Quick question about devices, if I could ask. So you have all this data. Are you getting into tracking and seeing like any sort of metadata or any sort of benchmarks associated with devices where you see there's more trend associated with this type of device or that device, or it's more of this type of device is being spoofed? Or if you're not doing that, is that something you think about in the future that is valuable?
For sure. Yeah. So, I mean, I think we consider a kind of reputation, for example, and that reputation can live at multiple layers. So it can live at the layer of the device type, or it could live at the layer of the user. So, for example, we actually have seen like the same users, the same devices, emails, people in like 20 of our different customers, right? So that allows us to have, when they come to the 19th, we have an incredibly rich data set and reputation on that user. And so we can then use that to inform our intelligence. Super simple example of this. Hey, if we've seen your email before and we know you actually are in China, and then you try to pretend to be like a US citizen, we will have some sort of risk associated with that, right? Because we know your true location based on a bunch of other, data points. And then the other thing I'll say is like, so Joey and I, we just published this huge research quality and fraud report where we looked at, it's the biggest report on fraud and market research ever by probably a factor of 1,000. Looked at 50 million sessions of data from 3,700 different respondent sources. And Erinn, one of the things that's super interesting is that the platform, the kind of device type matters so much. So mobile apps are much harder to commit fraud on. So the fraud rates are more like 6, 7, 8%, 8, 7, 7, 8, 9. But then on mobile web, it's more like 14, 15. And on desktop, particularly Windows, it's like 3 to 25, 26%. So much, much higher. And it's just because like desktop machines are much more scalable. You can run them in servers, you can run them on the cloud, versus mobile apps are much harder to run at scale. You need to have physical devices or like emulators, which are more expensive and slower and harder to program, versus like Windows machines in the cloud are there's so much infrastructure for fraud on those that the fraud rates are 4 times higher.
Those are very interesting stats. I'm looking forward to, is that already out there? That's something that I can take a look at and see. I'd love to see that.
It was published last week. Yeah. So yeah, definitely take a
You
look.
guys are the cutting edge of
You know,
podcasts around the mobile panel report.
Well, and I did want to switch the topic to that report, right? Because Brian and I, for years and years, we would publish this report that has not quite as much notoriety, but we would discuss the biases of different panels and the inherent skews for behavioral and attitudinal metrics based on sample sources. And as he said, we were consultants, so we did not own an asset. So all of these people were our vendors, were our clients, were our customers. It was a very symbiotic ecosystem. So it was always blinded, and everyone always hated that. And you all have published, and I've gone in and I've hit my drop down and I've looked up a whole bunch of people who I know exactly who they are. It is unblinded, and you rank every single source of traffic. What has the reception been from that? Have you gotten any backlash? Is it only applause? Has anyone been super surprised? Like tell us what it's like to be the ones who finally kind of pull back the veil and publish this.
I think we're both smiling because there's always such a broad mix of responses, right? Like you have some people that are like,
Yeah.
we need more. Can we get the ordered list of 1 to 3,700 by fraud rate? Other people are like, wow, that's more transparent than we expected. So definitely a range, but I think it is kind of what the industry has been looking for a long time. We want to do it in a way that celebrates the people that are working really hard and have great quality data, while also calling out the fact that, look, even the average is still good. And we don't want to just throw people under the bus who still have great quality traffic. And so we end up going with this kind of top performers versus middle of the pack versus there are a few bottom 1% that we felt like we need to call out. You got to search around and find some of those.
Right.
But
If you see a tomato flying at the screen, you found a bad source.
yeah, this was
Rotten tomato.
rotten tomato, exactly.
But
But
I've not found any of those yet in my because it's not published in order, right? You do have to kind of look through and look up.
Right. If you click get lucky, you'll run into a few.
you won't have to click too far.
You won't
Yeah.
have to click too far. So yeah, I know we struggled a lot with this, and I think we had the first day. So, and maybe I'll take you back to like the first time we even hinted that we were going to share this.
Mhm.
It's really unbelievable. So we posted on LinkedIn and said, hey, we found a bunch of sources that are really low quality and have really high fraud rates to the point where, it's a majority of or higher, closer to like 80% of the traffic, 90, closer to 100. And, instantly I got calls from probably 6 or 7. It was insane. Within 1 to 2 days, calls from like all of the major major sample sources. And everyone, honestly, the reception was quite interesting in that everyone wants the information to improve their products. Like, I don't think anyone was like, hey, silence this.
Right.
It was like, hey, we want to work with you guys to understand where we are so we can improve our products. And what we also found through the research is that the larger providers are generally better, like size of panel and source does improve outcomes. And so that was quite interesting. I think the big struggle for us was like, how do we provide something that's interesting and transparent without, besmirching or, just hurting businesses? Right.
Right.
Not even clients, but also just like I don't want to hurt someone's business. Like, I'm a business owner. It's very hard to run a business. And so like, I don't want to, besmirch or disparage someone. So we really just leaned into the idea of, hey, let's champion, some of the people that are top performing. And then let's also, identify the folks that are in kind of the middle. And then we will call out some of the folks we think are like, hey, you should stay away from these.
Yeah. I think there was a fear too from the beginning that this could be harmful for the market research industry. And that might sound weird, but for example, if we were like, oh, the quality is terrible everywhere, and suddenly people are like, wait, brands are saying, why am I buying this? You know what I mean? So I think there was a little bit of fear because they didn't know the underlying data, which was, it's actually better than most people have been talking about. It's to Henry's point, the 8 or 9% fraud rate, which is on mobile, which is much lower. And so I think that was a couple that really calls too of, hey, is this going to be harmful for the industry as a whole? And it's like, no, everyone's working on this problem and for the most part doing a good job.
Man, it's so interesting that you bring up the like potential harm. I think it's interesting about the scale of the companies that the larger ones do tend to have less fraud. I think something that's really interesting though, I am surprised that you are surprised that 8 or 9% is that's kind of better, because that's about where I would have thrown the dart. I don't know where you would have thought, Brian. Maybe I should have had you write that down on a Post-it before Henry said that. But because you're capturing programmatic, truly systematized, industrialized, like true fraud, right? These are not people who are like just kind of trying to get through that I'm me sitting here pretending that I'm a CEO so that I can get an extra $20. Like, if I say I'm Andrew sitting in Indiana and I'm taking it from Andrew's computer in Indiana, you guys wouldn't catch me because I'm trying to be who I am, and then I'm just lying my ass off in the actual survey. And so I think, when we talk about that 8 to 9% does seem about right to me. And the thing that's important and that I want our listeners to, really kind of capture is that if it is 8 or 9%, blocking 20% so that you're making sure you get all of that 8 to 9, and then the other, 10 to 11 that were kind of bad or fishy, like, that's not the point. Getting the bullseye on that 8 to 9% that probably, I'm getting to a question, I swear. That 8 to 9%, hitting that nail on the head is so key to the health of our entire industry. Sure that you're blocking those right people. So my question is looking at the percentages the way that you are and seeing the percentage of traffic that Verisoul is blocking, and it seems like you're doing that in a very sophisticated way. I trust that, just kind of listening to the way that you're talking about it, the methods that you're employing. What does it look like from a distribution when you all are saying that, okay, these are really bad? I think you had mentioned, Joey, that it's like 80% of the traffic is bad. It's like bad is really, really bad. Where's the top performer? Are they at, 5? Is it half of the median, half of that middle of the pack? Are they at 1? Is anyone at 1? Were there any pure sources? Like, give us a sense of what kind of the distribution looks like here amongst the sources that you looked at.
Yeah, so there's a couple so maybe the most interesting high level stat is basically the 5 worst sources contributed over 10% of all of the fraud we saw. So 5 total sources that we looked at was over 10% of the total fraud that we profiled over the entire 50 million.
Wow. That's like income taxes.
Right. So then I think the other thing to note is that we also, one of the factors we looked at is what is the type of source? Meaning, is it a survey specific source, like kind of a take surveys to earn money, or are there other economic or value models that create an interesting set of respondents? So one example is we looked at kind of news and entertainment as a category, where it's take a survey to get access to another news article. Now, that's not really like it's not ripe for fraud in that there's really no value to a fraudster. There's no pure economic value to a fraudster. And so that those sources generally had very high quality. So like, fraud rates from news apps were like 3%, right? Super, super low. And that's probably like 1 or 2 news apps that were bad and had some economics. Like if you were to look at MSN or Yahoo or whatever, those apps, they're near zero, right?
Yep.
And any non-zero would probably be like some sort of, bot that just happened to be on there. So there are like different economic models that create really good respondent groups. There are, on the contrary, some really bad ones. Like you want to talk about some of the bad, like the browsers and stuff?
Yeah, I mean, some of the worst category that we saw came from browsers. And it's oftentimes people that they're using that browser to try to spoof their location to begin with. And so it kind of overlaps in part with that. The traffic that we're seeing, or the quality we're seeing, is oftentimes 20, 30, 40% fraud rates on these browsers, where essentially a third of the traffic coming from them is terrible. To your question on what actually makes someone a top performer, though, we kind of thought about that in 2 lenses. One being size. We want to make sure there was at least a minimum size, minimum threshold to even really be included. And the second was quality. And on the exact rate, if the median panel was, I think, 9.6% average fraud rate. The average amount of fraud in the industry as a whole, I think, was 9% for mobile apps.
Yep.
I think the top performers, looking at it recently, was like 5 to 6% or better in terms of a fraud rate to be included in that list.
Right.
That's kind of around the area, and some go all the way to 0, but that's kind of a ballpark.
Yeah, that's right. And we did also factor in things like geographic coverage, right? So some geographies are a bit harder or a bit smaller. And so we, pieced together a few different components: size, quality, and then like geographic coverage, and made sure we got some coverage and as well as some of these category source types. So like make sure we get some folks from the kind of rewards apps, some from the gaming, some from the news and social, right? So that way there was kind of a smattering across a range of source types.
I guess from my standpoint, my only question would be, you mentioned the beginning of this year, you kind of were at 0 in terms of the market research industry, and then now it's really kind of catapulted through the course of the year. I'm just curious, what do you think the biggest impact that created that appetite within the industry? Is there anything that changed, you think, that happened in the industry, or do you just think it's new technology? Just kind of like to hear what might have driven that.
I would think it was probably a little bit more on our side, to be honest, in terms of like the industry has been looking for these types of solutions for a long time. And there's been a number of, solutions that have kind of come and gone over the past 6, 8, 10 years. I think for us, we hadn't really thought about market research as a vertical. Again, like Verisoul started not as a market research company, but as a fraud prevention company. So we were working with software companies, gaming companies, advertising. And there were a couple companies that kind of were adjacent to market research, where maybe it was a panel where they had a lot of games, but they might have had 1 or 2 surveys, which made us realize, okay, we're kind of working on this use case right now. Also, I joined the team in October. Again, Henry and I worked at Bain together, and we were kind of piecing together when I first joined, where should we go after? What's the best space? And we looked at, what's the right fit versus where do we have traction? And market research was one with a ton of fit, no traction. And we were like, how can we try to break in there? And what's nice about market research is everyone in the industry kind of knows each other. And so once someone's tested your product and proved that it works, word spreads like wildfire. And so that happened to us where one of our first customers, Suzy, we did a case study with them where they were comparing us against 4 other solutions. And they found that we caught more fraud with fewer false positives. So kind of that more precise metric that we were targeting of, it's not just blocking more people, it's actually blocking the right people. And so once we landed that customer, I mean, you can go into more detail on kind of how that went, but we quickly started to grow within market research.
Yeah. I think as far as like why market research has appetite for this, I think it's existential to the industry. Everyone cares about it and thinks about it. So it's existential to the industry. As you guys have talked about, there's people that devote their entire lives to thinking about quality and getting the right users and getting real insights. It's super core to the business. Yet it feels like a lot of the solutions just don't hit the mark, right? They're blocking too many users. They're not that accurate. They're hard to trust. They've just got bought by a competitor. They're bought by private equity and there's no more investment in the product. And so it just felt like there was a big opportunity and the existing solutions just, I mean, the best way to explain it is just in the data, like we have, when we've gone head to head, like 97% of those have ended up choosing us just based on their actual testing and what's working and like the real results they're seeing. And luckily everyone in this space is a researcher. And so they know how to run pilots and figure out what's going to be best for their business. And so I think that's kind of why the appetite's been there.
You had mentioned earlier that it's completely invisible to respondents. That's true. The respondent has no idea this is happening.
Correct. Yeah, totally in the background.
Can you permanently block bad actors? And there are, you said there's groups of people working together with various devices. Can you shut down that entire coordinated fraud ring or fraud syndicate, survey fraud cartel, fraud collective? I'm throwing out a lot of names for whatever those people are doing. Can you block down that whole system?
Honestly, no. It's very hard. They have a series of hundreds, maybe thousands of devices at
wow.
times. They operate with hundreds or thousands of networks, IPs that are rotating every couple hours. And so pinpointing the exact location is actually something governments do or kind of like actual crime investigation organizations. So if you've ever seen on those, those videos of FBI-like teams busting through the door and finding the rack of devices, that's really, relegated to governments because it's actually criminal activity that we just don't have, jurisdiction over. And also they're pretty sophisticated. So the best we can do is stop them in real time. But
cool.
Marking the devices though, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. I mean, there are some with mobile apps, we do have a way to physically mark that device as having committed fraud within that application. So if that device, even upon a factory reset, tries to come back, that device will be blacklisted forever.
You talked a little bit about type 2 error, which I'm passionate about with type 1 error. Most people talk about type 2 error. I'm also passionate about that, but I think that everybody's working to try to solve the type 2 error. And, there's Reddit groups, Facebook groups, Discord, all of these fraud farms are working collectively. How fast do you all have to move to kind of stop the next, they find a hole in the system and then you got to block it again? How fast do you all have to move?
You essentially have to be on the ground floor and kind of have an ear to these rings, right? The Discord channels, the Telegram groups, what have you. So we work with some ex-fraudsters as contractors that can relay information to us saying, hey, here's this new type of botnet, or here's this new Chrome driver. Make sure that you all can detect this, and we'll run tests and we'll make sure that, oh, okay, here's an anomaly and we can use that to detect this in the future. That is the best way to stay a step ahead. And I think the second piece is, because we work across so many industries, we're seeing the most sophisticated fraud of different types. And so we can learn from one industry and an attack that's happening over here and apply it to market research or to another industry that's happening over there.
Cool. Love to hear that. Finally, and then we can do some final thoughts after this. Other use cases. So you guys are smart. I can tell you have that Bain background. You're collecting what I call longitudinal patterns of billions of touch points with devices. There's got to be lots of other use cases. I don't want you all to divulge other stuff, but I'm fascinated with which other options are out there for you all. And I don't know if you can address that or have thought about it.
Yeah. So one simple one is that, right now we give customers a fraud score, but why not a value score?
Yeah.
So why couldn't we help customers actually find the inverse, which is, hey, we think this is a very high value user and you should treat them as such with some sort of incremental economic opportunities or better, lower friction experience or access to better offers, better surveys, things like that. That's one super simple, but very powerful potential unlock. Another one is what I would call more like threat feeds. So like right now we operate in real time monitoring users wherever they are on business applications. But we could also provide, we have this massive raw, data set of kind of exhaust data that's coming out. Erinn, to your question earlier, like devices that are high risk or emails that are fraudulent or whatever, like could we provide that as a threat feeds database that customers can then just dip into and say, hey, what's happening on, is this email ever been seen before? And is it risky, or what locations has it been seen in, or what's happening with this ISP or IP address or things like that, even if we're not seeing the user. So those are just a few. Any of these that come to your mind?
I think you covered most of it, honestly. But I think that's kind of all like within market research. But then again, there's a bunch that we're doing kind of outside of market research, which I don't know if you were going that way with that question at all. For example, like in product-led growth software, where you get a free trial to try out the product. Super common that we have a ton of customers kind of in that space where fraudsters are showing up and they're making free trial accounts to gain access to either data credits or AI compute or things of that nature, where it's different from market research, right? It's not around data quality, but it's still there's an incentive, there's a benefit to creating fake accounts. And really anywhere on the internet where there's an incentive to create a fake account, Verisoul can be there, or on, with web, mobile app, etc.
One other one I'll say that's interesting that's forthcoming and we're starting to think about is just what I would call like authenticated agents. So there's, bots and AI agents that are out there, but there's also, in my mind, kind of a future economy of authenticated agents, meaning, hey, I have this agent that's acting on my behalf and it's authenticated as like a user of mine. And how do you permit those for certain use cases, but not others, right? So you might not want to let the authenticated agent take a survey, but you probably are fine with them making a payment on behalf of that authenticator. And so how do you distinguish between those like good authenticated agents versus bad bots, frauds, fraudulent bots, et cetera? So that's kind of another thing we're thinking about long term.
We're also set up pretty well for that use case, just because I think a lot of competitors will block solely off of, hey, is someone running automation? Whereas we have a lot of rich intelligence of like, are they coming from the right geolocation? Is this someone who's been verified? There are a lot of other avenues that we play in that kind of you need the full suite to be able to make that call.
I still have a quick question to go with that, and there may not be an answer to this. When you're talking about, verifying an agent that goes and does some sort of task, right? Whether I'm logging in, creating a fake account, whatever else, as people use more AI and they prompt engineer things to go create an account for them or do things like that, is there a thought in how that will actually affect it? Because that's technically it's not me doing it, so it's some sort of agent doing it. And is there workarounds for that?
Well, I mean, that's kind of one of the things we're already seeing and doing. So, for example, we have our own AI agent that we've built that can go to any site and create fake accounts, which we just use for demo purposes. So when we meet with one of these AI companies, for example, we show them, hey, we use your own AI to like get past your captchas and create fake accounts at scale. Here's how it works. So it definitely like exists now. I think in that case, it's like that's a traditional bad bot and is not fundamentally or philosophically different than the kind of scripted bots today, especially if it's not like pre-authenticated as you.
Yeah. But if you, for example, because we have so many signals, you could in theory say, hey, this person is using automation, but it is also a real email coming from a device we've never seen before and, in the location that we're targeting. So by having more information, you can start to tease out what you're willing to allow and what you're not willing to allow.
Well, I have some final thoughts, but I love you guys, Joey, Henry. Any final thoughts before we kind of close this thing out?
No, super great discussion. Thank you guys so much for having us on. I'm going to be trying to get Joey to do a mustache that looks as good as Andrew's.
Andrew, you fit right in down here in Austin. But no, thank you for having us on. I mean, we've loved the conversation. We love these types of conversations. It's critical to have, these detailed discussions, and I appreciate you all digging in on the product and how it works. I don't want people to just trust that it works. I want them to try it. I want them to see it. I want them to understand the underlying tech. It's why we do free pilots. It's why we let people test it against other solutions. So no, I really appreciate the conversation.
One of the things I've always thought that the great skills in research, originally, most of my career, it was always, are you detail oriented and are you curious? But I've changed that. It might be this my progression in my career. Now it's just, are you smart? And if you're smart in this industry, you're going to be successful. And, I mentioned it a second ago, but you guys clearly have that Bang background and very, very smart. And I'm so happy you're in this industry and helping us and helping the industry grow. We're friends with a lot of your competitors. And I'm hoping that, this is a rising tide lifts all ships and iron sharpens iron situation. That's what we need in this industry. So I encourage people, download that market research quality report from them. It's completely free. Play around with it. And this industry needs a lot of improvement. And so thank you all for helping us there. You guys took about 40 completely unscripted questions today. We didn't prepare you with any of this. And so I really, really appreciate it. Thanks for your all's time.
Yeah, thank you all. Super appreciated. Really fun.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, I'll just close out with echoing a lot of Brian's thoughts. Can't wait to learn more. I'm definitely going to go poke around in the strategically non-ranked, non-macro informational report. I will click that get lucky button 3,700 times and figure out what's going on. And thank you for the Verisoul socks. They're very cozy. Joey hit me up with some of those in New York at the IA Ignite conference, which was one of the first times I heard about you guys. And I have to ask, since you're in Austin, have either of you actually been to Franklin's, and is it worth me going all the way down there for it?
So yes, have been to Franklin's. If barbecue is the number one thing you care about in the world, then yes. But I think there's probably a half dozen other really, really good barbecue joints that are going to have a fourth of the line and are like, I have a whole list. I've got a whole guide to Austin with about, I think there's 10 on my list that are just incredible. And I don't think you'd be able to tell the difference between Franklin's and them.
Is one of them Stubbs? Stubbs I went to that has like a gospel band during brunch. Oh my God, incredible. I don't even remember the food, but I remember the experience.
Yeah, Stubbs is a great concert venue. Yeah. And good barbecue.
The other one is Interstellar, which has a Michelin star.
That's your
That's
favorite.
the best.
I think that's better than Franklin's, even head to head.
Yeah.
But the wait's going to be like 2 hours.
The hack for Franklin's is you can order ahead and pick it up.
Yeah.
Basically, you can order, you need to do it like 6 weeks ahead. But so if you want to come down, just order it.
Over 5 pounds.
And you got to order 5 pounds, but just bring a group of friends or
Not
just
a problem.
bring a fridge.
Bring a bib and a.
That doesn't intimidate me at all. I'll see you guys in 6 weeks.
I heard they
Here,
banned
final
it too.
thoughts. Thanks for coming on, man.
Yeah.
I heard they banned it too. You used to be able to pay somebody to stand in line for you, right? And they banned that whole process.
Oh, really?
That's what I heard.
Hey, Erinn, thanks for joining us. You added a lot of value in that from the technical side, and so we appreciate having you on.
Yeah, everyone
I
can
appreciate it, Andrew.
asking a smart question versus when you are just keeping things moving along. Thank you, Erinn.
All right, everybody. Thanks for listening. If you listened this long, appreciate it.
Thanks.
See you. Thank you.
Bye.